Updated travel quarantine protocols to be announced tomorrow. Malta's High Commissioner to the UK will hold Mark Camilleri responsible for new book revelations. And school attendance be made compulsory once again. All this and more on Lovin Daily. Good evening, Malta and Gozo. I'm Yannick Parch. With me is Tim Diacono, and welcome to Lovin Daily. Apologies for starting late. We had some technical difficulties to deal with before we could start. Today we have a special guest in the studio, lawyer Andre Borg, who recently filed a judicial protest against the government's quarantine protocols. So stay tuned to the end of the show for what's set to be a great interview. But before that, let's jump straight to our first story for the evening. Tim?
Yeah, exactly. After quite a huge national outcry, Health Minister Chris Fenn announced today via Twitter that he's going to be announcing new protocols to Malta's travel quarantine regulations. He didn't say what they were, but there has been quite a lot of emphasis in recent days over the fact that Maltese residents specifically who are travelling from countries which the health authorities classify as dark red are being forced to quarantine for 2 weeks inside a hotel for pay €1,400 for the stay. If they don't pay up, they will end up getting sued by the Malta Tourism Authority. So there has been, this rule has been around for a few months now, but it's only picked up steam in recent days with a lawsuit filed, a judicial protest filed, and and Daniel Omana's sister Rachel, as a young girl with Down syndrome being forced to quarantine inside the hotel. So this led to quite a lot of outcry. Many major politicians spoke out about it, and it seems that the pressure is paying off, which obviously then raises the question as to why were they introduced in the first place if all it takes is just a bit of pressure and the rules can just be changed, right? These are meant to be based on scientific evidence that you need to be in the hotel. That's what's been told all throughout.
Yeah, it remains to be seen what updates will be announced tomorrow. But yes, you're right. It does beg the question, why is it that public outcry is enough to change regulations? That being said, it seems that the rules were problematic for quite a few people. So hopefully we'll see some changes soon that would make life easier for many Maltese residents. On to our next story. Malta's High Commissioner to the UK, Manuel Mallia, has sent a formal warning towards Mark Camilleri, the former Book Council chairman, after he named him in a post about his new tell-all book. Camilleri has completed work on his book, A Rent Seeker's Paradise, in which he says he will be lifting the lid on major untold stories of government-sponsored corruption and crime, which he says could also lead to arrests. In a press release announcing the book's launch, Camilleri said it would show how Mallia, a former Home Affairs Minister, had, quote, participated in the abetting and covering up of money laundering and illegal oil smuggling business. So responding to the post, Mallia, who's a renowned criminal lawyer himself, called on Camilleri to immediately retract his statement. He said, "I am formally informing you that your allegation is completely false, baseless and unfounded in fact and law. You are therefore being requested to immediately retract those defamatory and injurious words and are formally being informed that you will be held responsible for all damages envisaged by law." Camilleri, who is not one to shy away from controversy and confrontation, responded by telling Mallia that the book had already been published digitally and would be printed in a larger volume in October. Essentially, Mark Camilleri is not backing down and said, "I would advise you to go ahead with any legal action you plan to do. Thank you again for your interest." Now, the book is something that Camilleri has been teasing about for quite a while now. It seems that we're finally going to see what it contains.
Yeah, and some people are already seeing what it contains. What's interesting about this is the book has been released, but to a limited number of people. So he's releasing it as what's known as an NFT, a non-fungible token, which means it's available digitally to a select number of people who pay quite a hefty price for it. It's around €290 or something like that, 0.1 Ether. And he said 6 people have already bought it. I wonder who these people are. So some people are already getting a chance to read it. The general public will get a chance in October. Moving on to another COVID-19 related story, the Education Ministry has clarified that as of this coming scholastic year, school attendance will be compulsory once again. So if you remember quite early on, well, also quite early. When schools reopened for the first time during the pandemic, there was quite a bit of trepidation by a few parents who were concerned that they would have to send their children back to school despite the fears of the virus and the fears of quarantine. And the government allowed parents not to send their children to school and for them to stay at home for reasons of public health. As of this scholastic year, this rule will no longer apply, which means children will have to go to school no matter how scared the parent is of COVID or not. It's a clear sign by the authorities that things have to go back to normal eventually, and normal means pre-COVID normality. And it shows that there is some kind of confidence at least that things are on the right track. So I know that some people are complaining about it, but when you look at the big picture, it's actually a very good development.
No, I think children's education is very important, and ultimately, if the authorities have said that it's fine and safe for kids to go to school, then I don't see any reason why they should be kept home. The next story is about Malta's finance minister, who has said that Malta's two political parties will not be spared the government's drive to collect unpaid taxes. Craig Caruana this morning launched the government's pre-budget document where he emphasized the need for the country to clamp down on tax evasion. Last week, the Times of Malta reported that both the Nationalist and Labour parties' media companies owe the state more than 5 million in unpaid VAT and have been warned that they must start honouring agreements to settle their dues. This morning, Caruana emphasized the need for the country to really show it means business when it comes to tax evasion, arguing that this would be to the benefit of the whole country ultimately. He reiterated his pledge to increase taxes, not to increase taxes in the upcoming budget, adding, however, that government could not continue being robbed of money it was owed. Addressing the issue of the two political parties, specifically, Caruana said the parties would need to abide by the same regulations as everyone else, adding that he would be explaining how the government intended to move forward on this in his budget speech. Caruana said he also expected the Maltese economy to grow by 6.8% next year, with the deficit falling from 12 to 5.6% of GDP.
Yeah, it's always been a funny one, this, right? That political parties often preach about good governance and the importance of paying your taxes and following the law, and that the institutions are working, but then their own media houses don't pay taxes and don't follow the law themselves, and no action is ever taken against them. Let's hope that's changing, but forgive me for being a little bit skeptical because literally they're both doing it. They're the two parties controlling power.
Refuse to pay tax.
Yeah, but it's quite a hypocritical situation, right? I mean, they should pay up. They've been saying they're going to for years, and let's hope the VAT department acts a bit strongly with them as it would with any regular person. And the Gozo Tunnel project has moved a small step closer towards its completion, which is the Infrastructure Malta has chosen a consortium of companies who will perhaps end up building this tunnel. So it had issued a call for proposals a while ago, and it finally selected these companies who are Equitix from the UK, Itochu from Japan, Yapi Merkezi and Makyol from Turkey, and Egis from France. And there's still a lot of processes left before the actual construction can begin. I mean, think about it, that an election is on our doorstep. Not much has changed tangibly at all since the last election, right? So the last election, there was all this whole talk about the Gozo Tunnel, and we're going to build it, and we're going to actually see it done. 4 or 5 years on, nothing has happened. Now we have a list of 4 or 5 companies. It's obviously quite a controversial project. Many people are against it. Some people are calling for a referendum, but only for Gozotans. Some are saying it should be a national referendum with the Maltese taking part as well. It's certainly going to be hugely expensive, and if the private sector is going to be involved, it probably means that there'll be quite a hefty toll as well. Or do you want to see this tunnel?
To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. A part of me thinks that eventually, in the long term, it might make sense to have a direct link and sort of to avoid all the emissions of going back and forth with a ferry. But ultimately, I would hope that the competent authorities could do the necessary studies and find out exactly what the impact will be, and we'll move forward from there. So that's it for the headlines. We're going to cut to a short clip of an interview we had recently with Social Accommodation Minister Roderick Galdis, which will be airing tomorrow, and after that we'll be back with our interview with Andre Borg.
U x'inhi r-raġuni li ħafna minn dawn fis-sens hija kwistjoni forsi l-kumpaniji tal-assigurazzjoni qatt ma bdejtjaw il-protokolli?
Kien hemm diversi raġunijiet. Jien naħseb hemm raġunijiet li jistgħu jkunu wkoll anke data li bbażata fuq pajjiżi oħrajn. Pereżempju ħafna mid-data li kellna aħna pajjiżna kienet ibbażata fuq data tal-1992, jiġifieri fuq fl-Ingilterra. Mhux pajjiżna, ġifieri u naħseb jinki wasal iżmin li xi ħadd jibda jaqbad dalatu u jibda illum ħajkonna statistika. Ġifieri minn din l-iskema, bis-saħħa ta' din l-iskema issa il-pajjiż ħajbda jibni statistika. U nittama wkoll li l-istatistika issa tibda sservi ta' xprun għal dawk ta' warajja li jistgħu jgħidu sma' din l-iskema kellha l-effetti tagħha ma kienx tajba. U jaraw huma jiddeċiedu quddiem x'jistgħu jagħmlu wkoll fiha. Però llum dik l-informazzjoni ma kienx teżisti. U allura meta konna morru għand il-kumpaniji assigurativi kienu jtuna informazzjoni li forsi kienet iktar konservattiva u bbażata fuq 20-30 sena.
Welcome back to Lovin Daily. With me now is Andre Borg, a lawyer who recently filed a judicial protest over this controversial hotel quarantine rule. So before anything else, can you please explain? First of all, thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
And so can you explain the judicial protest, what you're stating exactly on behalf of your clients who have been forced into one of these quarantine hotels?
Exactly. I was recently, I believe it was Friday, I was contacted by a number of clients, actually, who are Maltese residents. They're foreigners, but I mean, they've been living in Malta for the past 14 years, imagine that. They own their own property in Malta, so they are property owners after all, with a Maltese ID card. They work here full-time, and they had to leave the island for a very personal issue, so it wasn't a holiday, like many are saying, that people are going for holidays, coming back, expecting not to follow the rules. No, there are many cases, hundreds of cases, I would say, of people having to leave Malta to work. I've heard of people working in oil rigs, for example, in Yemen and all these places. Others who would go to visit a family member, would go to a funeral or perhaps a wedding celebration, or even to attend to some other personal issue. So what happened is these clients came back to Malta. At the airport, they were stopped by the authorities and they were ordered to go to a hotel. They complained, I would say.
The one in Slema, the one in Slema,
No,
right?
they're in Corinthia.
Corinthia, okay.
So they said, well, we have our own property. Of course, they showed the ID card, all the keys and everything. They were expecting to go back home to check. You know, we had a number of power cuts lately and rain as well. So they wanted to check whether, you know, water seeped in, for example, or whether the fridge is still switched on, or whether the plants are okay, or whether, you know, to check the security of the house as well. So they were even refused to check on their own property, the enjoyment of their property. They were aware that you need to spend 14 days of quarantine coming back, so they knew the rule of 14 days quarantine, but not the hotel obligation. So they were they were ready to spend 14 days at home, like all the positive cases that nowadays, I mean, you know, if you're positive, you stay at home, you don't go to a hotel. So by the same, let's say, yardstick, you would spend the 14 days quarantine, coming back from a dark red country at home. So to cut a long story short, once they were detained, I would say, because they were escorted by the police, and there are the police at the reception and in corridors and everywhere in these hotels. So they, of course, contacted the lawyer to see what could happen. Over the weekend, of course, we were working on this case in particular, and yesterday we filed the judicial protest. The protest, coming to your question, is there's a presentation of facts. So what happened, the story I'm about to explain, and then of course where is the breach of the law, basically. So why are we presenting the judicial protest? We cited a number of articles from the Constitution with respect to human rights. So as we all know, the Constitution provides for a number of human rights and freedoms of the individuals, such as the enjoyment of one's property, the freedom of movement, the right to liberty, right to life, and all these. So we're saying that a number of articles were being breached by the fact that Maltese residents are being detained in hotels under supervision. They cannot even exit the room or nothing, absolutely nothing, as opposed to spending 14 days of quarantine at home, where you have, of course, more comfort, you have your own room, your space, your environment, your kitchen. You could cook for yourself, your TV, your sofa, and all that. So the enjoyment of one's property was being denied by the fact that one is detained unlawfully and against his wish and her wish in a hotel. So it was basically a case of in breach of human rights.
Just
in short.
Just to clarify for people who may not be so well versed in the law, what does the judicial process actually do? Like, does someone have to answer to it now, or is it just a declaration?
To clear, the judicial protest is not a lawsuit, so it's not a fully fledged lawsuit. It's, as I was saying, it's a presentation of facts and intended to push forward a particular issue. Let's say, from a legal point of view. It is a judicial act. It is filed in court at the court registry. You notify a number of people. In fact, we even notified the European Commission, for example, with this judicial protest, the President of the Republic, being the guardian of the Constitution, and a number of embassies, I would say. But so it was quite big, because we felt that human rights are being breached. Usually, yes, it's replied to, so there is a counter protest, rather. So we hope that it will be answered. But anyway, the end result, the aim of the judicial protest is to raise awareness, and also hopefully tomorrow there will be some changes, and we look forward to some development.
So yes, I'm getting to that. So Chris Fenn said today that there will be some kind of changes to the quarantine protocols as of tomorrow. We don't yet know what they're going to be. First of all, what do you think they should be? Like, how do you think what situation would be such that it won't breach people's fundamental human rights to free movement, to their own property? What's the ideal situation?
So first and foremost, at least if there had to be quarantine, because that's another argument. Because if you're coming back with a negative PCR taken before you traveled, so you boarded a plane, you went to the airport with a negative PCR, you met some other people as well, so all that. Coming over, then after a few days you do another PCR.
And you're vaccinated.
It's negative, and you're vaccinated as well with an EU passport. So I'm against quarantine in the first place, but let's not go there. Let's say there would be quarantine just the same. For example, other countries are so limiting this quarantine period for 10 days, some are 5 days, test and release option, kind of. But anyway, let's say there would be quarantine just the same. At least you would spend these days at home. So you would enjoy your own property, confined within your own premises, at least. So you would live, restricted, because you won't be in a community, but at least you're at home. So your rights over there are not breached. So that's the first step. Well, other possibilities could be perhaps, some are arguing that if this detention was illegal, then I should be refunded the €1,400. Actually more, it's not just 1,400, because that's only for lodging and bed and breakfast, rather. So I know of other people who spend another €800 to buy this takeaway food and deliveries. It's 2 weeks, lunch and dinner. So imagine that.
Yeah.
They had to, of course, forfeit some other income, perhaps, because they couldn't work. Whereas at home you could telework. In a hotel, it's quite limited.
Yeah,
We've
money
heard
coming
of
out.
cases that internet wasn't really good. So you cannot really work. You have no access to your documents, to books, perhaps, which you would have at home in a library. So, the cost was not just 1,400, but much more. So we'll have to see whether there would be a refund of this 1,400. It would unlikely, but we hope so.
You think there should be, because the MTA has told us that in August alone there are around 2,000 people who ended up in quarantine, and this is just for August. There were like 1,300 in July as well, and a few even a bit fewer in June. So it's quite costly. But then again, there's also the point that these people had to pay for it. It's no joke, €1,400. Not everyone can. In fact, some people have actually said, like, I can't even afford it. They actually had to go to third parties
it's true,
to fork it out. So do you think the state has an obligation, at the end of the day, so people living inside its own country, some even citizens, to refund it, especially if the law changes tomorrow?
Well, given that we're saying that there was a breach of human rights, so I would expect that these are refunded. One should distinguish between tourists coming in, because you mentioned earlier on that this has been there for a number of months. Actually, I beg to differ, because initially it was meant to be a deterrent for tourists, just tourists coming in without a PCR or with just a PCR and without the vaccine certificate. There were rules were changing every week. So it was a fact that tourists were coming over to Malta sometimes without the necessary documents. So in that case, it was, let's say, justified, because if you're required to present a negative PCR and you're in Malta without a PCR, then it's justified. So one has to distinguish between one case and the other.
Yeah.
Lately, I have no idea exactly when it was really implemented, because it's not a law, by the way. This hotel quarantine is not found in a legal notice. So it was a decision. One fine morning, there was a decision that all arrivals from dark red countries, so basically it's half the world.
Yeah.
This is not a very restricted group of countries. Dark red countries, I was reading a few minutes ago, I believe it was 155. I'm not sure about the figure, but
there's a lot. There's many
but
countries.
There's a lot. So because at the moment we do not have green or amber lists, but just red and dark red. So basically you're in it.
So the funny thing is that what you had mentioned before, the previous situation where you mentioned that how it used to be that you only go into quarantine or to a hotel if you don't present the documents. The problem was that this dark red list is new, right? So before it used to be for over a year, even almost 2 years throughout the pandemic, green, amber, and red. Red means that if you don't present the necessary documents, you will have to go into quarantine.
The red was today's dark red.
Yes, exactly. But now exactly now this whole new dark red country has been because now the vaccine has been implemented, so red has become a little bit lighter. Anyway, now this dark red list. Do you know of any other countries in Europe that have implemented such a harsh travel ban on several countries, even after the vaccine was implemented?
As far as I know, Malta is the only EU country imposing hotel quarantine. So that's already a very restrictive measure, I would say. So it's not based on science, because otherwise all the other EU countries would have followed the same, let's say, scientific study.
Yeah.
So why only Malta? Do we have a specific situation over here? I don't think so. Actually, we really managed the situation, the whole COVID pandemic, quite well. Of course, there were ups and downs, there were periods, but overall, I think it was a very successful implementation. So that's why these kind of measures are really contradicting the results that we are having. I mean, we're top in terms of vaccination programs. We're very good at controlling and containing the pandemic over here. So why should we be the only country in Europe, basically, let's say within the EU, to introduce such drastic measures? You asked me whether the traffic light system is implemented over here.
The traffic light with the dark red system, as in beyond the traffic lights.
Yes, there are other countries. However, each and every country would follow its own, let's say, rules. There's no hard and fast list that an EU country would follow, but there are recommendations by the Council, in fact. So then each country, each EU state would follow these recommendations or not. But the question remains whether there should be a reintroduction, maybe tomorrow, of the green list, the amber list, the red and dark red. Because, okay, the pandemic will probably be here for the next couple of months, if not years, I would say, because in certain areas there could be developments over the coming months. It's something we have to live with. So shall we stay with the red and dark red countries? Or,
forever.
I mean, of course.
Okay, so do you think it's a coincidence that the rules are only going to change in the fact there was a public outcry over it? So obviously there were two incidents that followed each other in quick succession. First was the health authorities granting an exemption to the Malta national football team from any kind of quarantine after they went to play in Russia, which is a dark red country. Secondly was the plea made by Daniel Omana for his young sister Rachel to avoid hotel quarantine, to be allowed to quarantine at home after returning from Nigeria, where they went to do charity work.
And there was the Mosta goalkeeper.
And then there was the Mosta goalkeeper as well. Then
Mm.
that came to light after the football team was exempted. So that was a little bit funny as well. So, but do you think that it's a coincidence that the rules are changing now, or only going to change now that there's this outcry? Because if the rules are being decided based on what people are saying, that's not how science works, right? Science is meant to be like you just look at the evidence and follow the evidence and implement from there. But this seems to be decisions based on what people are saying, right? It's a bit contradictory.
Well, I think there were complaints over the previous, let's say, days or weeks, because I've been hearing about this hotel quarantine for quite some time, actually, for quite a number of days. What happened now is that, pressure starts building up, because then more and more cases would be involved, more families, more Maltese people would be caught up in hotels. So then, at some point, it erupts like a volcano, basically. So it's been piling up for quite some time. Now everything seems to be concentrated, and people were hoping that at least common sense would prevail earlier on. So when it didn't happen, then of course they went to the media. They couldn't take it anymore. They couldn't afford it. As I said before, my impression was that it was only for tourists. Eventually, when Maltese started being Maltese residents, because not just Maltese, by the way, Maltese residents were being affected, then it seems that people were talking, of course, families were complaining, social media, so...
Yeah.
Actually, I'm pleased that the Deputy Prime Minister took action. I would have been disappointed had it not happened, rather.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with that. That.
Yes.
So one could say that it is a reactive measure, but on the other hand, let's see the positive side out of it, and we look forward. I mean, these are measures which are changing every so often.
Yeah.
The pandemic itself is changing as well. So hopefully we would avoid these kind of situations beforehand. At least we would discuss, we would present the scientific evidence, if so. So at least let's try, going forward, let's try not to add even more suffering on people and residents who have been passing through a lot of time. They lost their jobs, some had to change jobs, close businesses, and the least we expect now is more measures being put on them by the superintendent, making the situation even more unbearable now.
Mm-hmm.
And mental health, we've heard of cases of mental health. I know of cases, people residing in hotels at the moment, hotel quarantine, and they're going, obviously everyone confined to a very small space, basically. There are situations of kids, of minors who are simply losing it because, of course, they're used to their own environment, their comfort zone, in their own rooms, with their own toys and TV and all that. and suddenly they're closed in a very small room doing nothing because they have they just have perhaps a tablet and that's it.
The Wi-Fi doesn't even work sometimes.
Sometimes.
So you said that the situation is actually worse than that of prisoners or people living in detention centers.
Well, actually, let me clarify this. What I was saying is that whereas in prison and in detention centers, at least you have some time to go out in the yard and to do some work and to at least break the day with a number of activities, being locked in a hotel room is worse than prison on that aspect.
Front,
yeah, rather. But well, the conditions are not really good as well. If you see some photos and videos I received with the cleaning not being done and the breakfast in tin foils, and let's not say it's worse than detention centers. But what I was referring to is the liberty, rather. Confined, yes, but not to one room, but at least you could do some exercise, at least. I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe in France when there was these kind of restrictions some time ago, at least you had some hours where you could leave and come back to to do some exercise or shopping and return back. So even quarantine was sort of,
You had said that there's a possibility that the judicial protest you filed could be the start of a longer process that will culminate in a constitutional case. So can you explain this?
So yesterday, when we filed the judicial protest, a number of clients were saying, well, okay, that's fine, but unless the measures would be revoked, then we could go all the way. So basically, we could file a constitutional case. As I said, there was a breach of human rights, so they were seeking the full, let's say, they were trying to find a solution, basically. So when you're in a very desperate situation, you would try and stick to whatever, even a constitutional case where you claim a breach of human rights. So yes, they were ready to file it unless the situation changes.
So obviously there have been several restrictions introduced since March 2020, and there can be an argument to be made for several of them that they are a breach of human rights, the rights to free movement, rights to enjoyment of property. There was even that incident when police were actually coming into people's homes to check if they have guests over. So there are a number of incidents that raise red flags on it. However, there seem to be at least some kind of trust in the authorities that they know what they're doing, and we're not going to try and challenge them. Now there seems to be a bit of a different tactic from a number of people, that people are trying to challenge it legally, at least this one. Do you think that
at least some measures?
Because
overall, I believe the authorities did a very good job, as I was saying. However, there were situations, for example, last year, because you mentioned March 2020. Between March and June last year, 2020, there was a declaration of public health emergency. So this was law. There was a legal notice published where there was a public health emergency which gives special powers to the superintendent of public health, including searching of houses and this is like when you have a state of emergency, so the laws would be there, but there would be overriding powers because of specifically that state of emergency, including a public health emergency. This was revoked in June because by June, eventually the situation got better in Malta, beginning of summer, as we all know. So the public health emergency was no more. And it was not reintroduced, not even now, not even in January, February, when we had all those cases. So there is no emergency, no public health emergency that would give these special powers to the superintendent. Of course, the law would still be is still there. The superintendent still has a very important role in favor of public health. However, it's not to the extent that we have an emergency. So yes, I would argue that these powers are debatable as well. So some of them would go overboard, including this hotel quarantine and you know.
Yeah. Are there others which might go overboard?
Well, I would say that searching people's homes would be let's say borderline.
Andre Borg, thank you very much for
Thanks
accepting this interview with Lovin Malta on Lovin Daily. Thank you very much for following us on Lovin Daily. Make sure you follow lovinmalta.com for all the latest developments and have an evening full of lovin'.